Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel tonight. I am going to share a story that taps into one of the most primal fears we have as human beings. The fear that our sanctuary, our home, is not actually safe. This is a true story that happened to a family in rural Alberta, Canada, back in the late 90s. It is a story about a dream house that was too good to be true, and the terrifying secret hidden just inches away from where a teenage girl slept every night. So settle in, turn off the lights, and let me tell you about the house with thin walls. The Martins were looking for a fresh start. Gerald was a handyman, a guy who could fix anything with an engine or a frame, and his wife Elaine wanted a quiet place to raise their two daughters, 16-year-old Clara and the new baby, Sophie. They found a sprawling old farmhouse in Alberta. It was dirt cheap because it was a massive fixer-upper. It had good bones, as Gerald liked to say, but it needed a lot of love. The winters out there are brutal, with winds that howl across the flat prairies and temperatures that drop so low it feels like the air itself is freezing. So getting the house sealed up before the snow fell was a priority. They moved in during a crisp September. The leaves were already turning gold and there was a bite in the air. Gerald took the master bedroom upstairs with Elaine and baby. Sophie stayed in a crib in their room until her nursery was ready. That left Clara to take the basement bedroom. Now, this was a dark dungeon of a basement. Previous owners had finished it quite nicely. It had plush grey carpet and wood paneling on the walls. That gave it a sort of cozy cabin feel. Gerald was particularly proud of the built-in shelving unit that took up an entire wall of Clara's new room. It was made of heavy dark oak, perfect for her books and her stereos. Clara tried to be positive about it. She liked having her own space away from the crying baby upstairs, but there was something about being underground that always unsettled her. The air down there was heavier, cleaner maybe, but colder, always colder than the rest of the house, no matter how high they cranked the furnace. The strangeness started almost immediately. Within the first week of moving in, little things began to happen, things you could easily brush off if you were busy. Unpacking, they would come home from a grocery run to find the front door standing wide open. Gerald would swear he locked it. Elaine would say he must have forgotten. They would argue about who was being careless. Then objects started shifting position. Elaine would leave her car keys on the kitchen hook and find them on the coffee table. An hour later, pictures on the mantelpiece would be turned to face the wall. Clara would come downstairs to find her school bag, opened her homework scattered across the floor. Everyone blamed everyone else. They were stressed, tired from the move. It was easy to rationalize it away. But the basement was different down there. It wasn't just things moving. It was the sounds. The first time Clara heard it, she was lying in bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars she had stuck to the ceiling. It was dead silent outside, just the vast, empty Alberta prairie. Suddenly, from behind the wood paneling near the oak bookshelf, she heard a scratch. It sounded like fingernails lightly or dragging across drywall. She froze, holding her breath. Then came a soft, muffled cough, followed by what sounded terrifyingly like a suppressed giggle, a low, throaty chuckle. Clara flew up the stairs that night, her heart hammering against her ribs. She told her dad there was someone in the walls. Gerald Ever, the practical man, grabbed his flashlight and went down. He tapped the walls, he listened, he checked the furnace room. Nothing, he told her. It was probably field mice getting in from the cold, or maybe the old house settling, the wood expanding and contracting in the temperature changes, he said. The acoustics down there were weird. That sounds from upstairs traveled down the vents. Clara wanted to believe him. She really did, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. So she bought earplugs. She started sleeping with her radio on, trying to drown out the noises that happened 3 or 4 times a week. The scratching, the coughing, and sometimes that awful low laughter that seemed to come right from behind her headboard. The winter set in hard snow drifted halfway up the ground floor windows, and the house felt isolated. Like a ship at sea, the tension in the house was palpable. Everyone felt on edge. Everyone felt watched, but nobody wanted to admit it. They were too deep into the renovations to invested in the dream. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in November. Gerald and Elaine had been invited to a community dinner in the nearest town, about 45 minutes away. It was a rare night out for them, and they asked Clara to babysit Sophie. Clara was fine with it. Sophie was 6 months old now and usually slept through the night. Clara's plan was simple: watch a movie upstairs, eat popcorn, and just listen to the baby monitor until her parents got home around midnight. Her parents left at 6:30 as the taillights faded down the long driveway. A heavy silence descended on the house. Clara locked the deadbolt and checked the windows, a habit she had developed since they moved in. She set up shop in the living room on the ground floor, the baby monitor sitting on the coffee table, glowing with a soft green light. Upstairs, Sophie was sound asleep, occasionally making little cooing noises that crackled over the speaker. For the first 2 hours, everything was fine. Clara watched a movie and tried to ignore the wind howling outside. But around 9 o'clock, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The air grew suddenly intensely cold. Clara pulled her blanket tighter. Then the baby monitor crackled. It wasn't a coo. This time it was a thud, like something heavy falling in the nursery upstairs. Clara froze, her eyes glued to the little speaker. Seconds later, she heard heavy, distinct footsteps, not on the monitor but above her head. Someone was walking in the upstairs hallway, someone wearing heavy boots. Clara's first instinct was that her dad had "Come home early, Dad," she called out, her voice shaking. No answer, just the heavy footsteps moving from the hallway toward the master bedroom. Then she heard the sound of drawers being opened and closed, aggressively rifled through. Panic clawed at her throat. She knew with sickening certainty that she and Sophie were not alone. She grabbed the baby monitor and ran to the kitchen phone. The landline was dead, no dial tone, just static. Whoever was up there had cut the line. She needed a weapon. She remembered that her dad kept an old hunting rifle in the front hallway closet, high up on a shelf. She knew it was unloaded. Her dad kept the ammunition locked in a separate safe in the garage, but the intruder didn't know that a gun was a gun. She crept to the closet and pulled down the heavy rifle. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She held it tight, knuckles White trying to look menacing, the footsteps upstairs stopped, then they started again, heavier, faster, coming toward the stairs. Clara didn't wait. She ran back into the living room, grabbed the cordless phone, hoping against hope it still had a signal. It did, thank God. She dialed 911, hiding behind the large sofa, pressing herself into the corner with the unloaded rifle across her lap. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, a lifeline in the dark. There is someone in my house, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. I am babysitting. My little sister is upstairs. I hear him walking round. He cut the phone lines. Okay, honey, stay calm. Where are you right now? I am in the living room behind the couch. Stay there, do not move. Officers are on their way. Keep the line open. For the next 15 minutes, Clara lived in an eternity of terror. She heard the intruder come down the stairs, slow, heavy steps. She heard him walk into the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator open. Then she heard him walk into the living room. She held her breath, pressing her hand over her mouth to stop her sobbing. He paused. Right on the other side of the sofa, she could hear his breathing, wet and congested. He stood there for what felt like hours, and then, miraculously, he turned and walked away towards the basement stairs. She heard the basement door open and close. She heard his heavy boots on the stairs going down to her room. Then there was silence. Sirens cut through the winter night. Blue and red lights washed over the living room walls. Within seconds, the front door burst open and 2 state troopers with drawn weapons entered the house. Clara stood up, still clutching the unloaded rifle, sobbing hysterically. They swept the house. They checked upstairs. Sophie was still asleep, miraculously unharmed. They checked the main floor. Nothing. Then they went to the basement. Guns ready, they shouted warnings. They kicked open closets. They checked under the bed. The basement was empty. There was no back door down there, no windows big enough for a person to squeeze through the pin. Intruder had vanished into thin air. The police were confused. They found the cut phone line outside. They found muddy boot prints in the kitchen that didn't match Gerald's size. But the man himself was gone. They assumed he must have slipped out a window while they were coming in the front, though there was no evidence of that. Gerald and Elaine arrived home 20 minutes later, frantic. They hugged Clara and checked on Sophie. Gerald was furious, pacing the kitchen, demanding answers while the police took statements. Then Gerald stopped pacing. A strange look came over his face. He looked at the basement door, then looked at the police officer. You need to go back downstairs, Gerald said, his voice low and strange. Sir, we already cleared the basement, the officer said. There is nobody down there. No, you do understand, Gerald said. He grabbed the officer's arm. You need to check Clara's room. Check the bookshelf. Clara looked at her dad, confused. Why the bookshelf? Gerald explained that when they bought the house he had noticed something odd about that built-in unit. It was too deep. It stuck out from the wall about 8 inches further than it should have for standard shelving. He had just assumed it was sloppy carpentry by the previous owner and ignored it. But now, with the muddy boot prints leading down there and nowhere else, a horrifying realization hit him. The police agreed to humor him. They went back down to the cold basement into Clara's room. They stood in front of the massive dark oak bookshelf. It looked solid, immovable. Gerald stepped forward and started feeling along the trim on the right side near the floor. His fingers found a small, almost invisible latch hidden in the woodwork. He clicked it. With a groan of hidden hinges, the entire massive bookshelf swung outward like a door, revealing a dark, narrow space behind it. The smell hit them first. It was the overwhelming stench of unwashed body odor, stale food, and human waste. The police shone their flashlights. Into the void, it wasn't just a crawl space. It was a hidden room about 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, running the length of Clara's bedroom wall. It was a squalid nest. There was a filthy sleeping bag on the floor, surrounded by piles of candy wrappers, empty soda cans, and scraps of food that had gone missing from the Martinez kitchen over the past few months. There were stacks of Polaroid photos taken of the family when they weren't looking, pictures of them eating dinner, watching TV, pictures taken from outside looking in. But the most horrifying discovery was yet to come. One of the officers noticed something on the wall that separated the secret room from Clara's bedroom. Right at eye level, about 5 feet off the ground, there was a small hole drilled through the wood paneling. From Clara's side in her bedroom, it was invisible, hidden in the dark grain of the wood and covered by a poster she had put up. But from inside the secret room, it was a perfect peephole. The officer put his eye to it. The view looked directly across the room, right at Clara's bed, right at her pillow. They realized with dawning horror that the noises Clara had heard, the scratching, the coughing, the laughter, it was undead ghosts. It was unmiced. It was a living, breathing stranger, sitting inches away from her head, watching her sleep every single night for 3 months. The intruder had used the noise of the windstorm to mask his movements. That night, he had gotten bold. Knowing the parents were gone, he had intended to do who knows what upstairs when Clara interrupted his plans by calling the police. When he heard the sirens, he had simply retreated back into his hole, pulled the bookshelf shut behind him, and waited. In the dark, while the police searched the room right next to him, they never caught the man. He had slipped out of the secret room sometime during the chaos after the bookshelf was opened, likely through a small access panel that led into the garage ceiling. He vanished into the cold Alberta night, leaving behind only his filth and the shattered sense of security of the Martin family. They moved out the next day, leaving most of their belongings behind. They never spent another night in that house. The house with the thin walls and the eyes that watched from the dark.